So welcome everyone to this webinar produced by Inta. We are here to talk about this morning on hybrid heating and is this a missed technology as part of the UK's net zero decarbonisation plans? So I'm your host and chair for this morning. My name's Kat Young. I'm the Heat and Local Energy Policy Lead at Energy Systems Catapult. We're an innovation agency accelerating net zero and net zero growth. So this is all about hybrid heat systems, and we're wanting to discuss where the industry is at currently and where the industry thinks there's gaps that we might want to look at addressing on should and how hybrid heat systems be further included in the net zero policy. And so the agenda for today, we are going to have a market overview from you and Sutherland at Worcester Bosch. We're then going to have a panel discussion where you can ask questions in the chat, and we'll have hopefully a conversation about various pros and cons on hybrid heating and what should be considered. We'll then hear more from the installer perspective, and then we'll wrap it up with a Q&A at the end as well. So before I hand over to Ewan, the hybrid heating systems, it can be quite a contentious topic. There's quite a lot, in my view, of arguments for and against. So the Energy Systems Catapult, we did a big modelling to net zero a couple of years ago on different scenarios and one of the problems challenges that comes up is meeting peak heat demand. So as we transition to net zero, it's how you keep heating on in a kind of beast from the east scenario, or when there's really high grid constraints. And in that transition, hybrid heat systems came up on modelling kind of more than we expected as their role. And so I think they do have some real advantages that can help accelerate net zero rollout in areas of grid constraints. But we know there are challenges around the potentially confusing consumer proposition and mixed messages of do heat pumps work by themselves, or do they need backup support? And then you've got two systems potentially to maintain the cost of that. So it's not a kind of simple go for it that the government is able to do, but that's part of why Inta wanted to have the conversation today, is to see where the industry thinks we're at and where we're going. So with an eye on the clock, I'm going to hand over to Ewan Sutherland from Worcester Bosch to give us a market overview.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. It's great to sort of be able to sort of talk to you about the actual potential for a hybrid market. I will be giving you a market overview of the housing stock. So maybe if we go to the next slide, please. So we have there's a lot going on in the heating industry at the moment, and we're currently looking at how we can move towards a zero carbon future, and it's currently being heavily electric driven, but there are some great opportunities, especially with our housing stock. We've got quite an aging housing stock within the UK. A lot of it is pre-war, Victorian terrace houses that has space limitations, where sometimes heat pumps are the sensible option, but there are times when we have to consider other factors. The government is actually updating its assessment procedure for appliances, and it's introducing a way of something called the Home Energy Model, the HEM, which will replace the existing sort of SAP method of calculation, an EPC for a property. But also what is really key to mention also is that, especially with the cost of living at the moment and rising prices for sort of consumers, we've got to try and find a cost-effective way for us to get to sort of net zero. So this slide is really showing the overall housing stock within the UK. There are some that are hybrid ready potentially, and there are some that are heat pump ready. And generally speaking, if your property is an EPC band C and above, it is potentially be able to sort of potentially be able to actually utilise a heat pump. But there are many properties that aren't, and on we've got things like the sort of low-rise flats, detached houses, semi-detached, and terrace houses. And on the grid, we sort of estimate from the data that we've got that potentially sort of up to 40% are heat pump ready, but also then below that, potentially 60% could be hybrid ready. And you can see also the percentage of properties from D to G. So you can see from that data that it basically sort of 40% properties could be heat pump ready. And on the bottom left-hand side, you can see the sort of housing stock we got from pre-19 all the way up to the present day. Other countries have a lot more modern and energy-efficient housing stock, but we've got what we've got. So for the renovation market, the average housing stock in the UK is sort of 95 metres squared, which isn't particularly large. We've got to find a lot of our properties have combination boilers in. They've taken out the cylinders over the years to put a combination boiler in. We have limited space, whereas a hybrid system, you can literally just add the heat pump to your existing system. There's been lots of grants for heat pumps, not so much for hybrids, but you can see from the actual overview of the housing stock on the left-hand side, you can see the sort of almost 20% are terrace houses, 25% are semi-detached. And generally, heat pumps generally fit better into sort of larger properties where they've got a bit of space around them. What is a hybrid system? It's a heating technology that combines an electrical operated air or water source heat pump with a boiler to provide heating and hot water. And this comes in various configurations. I mean, potentially a hybrid could be a brand new system within a renovation property. It could be sort of combined with also a hot water cylinder, and also it could be an add-on to a current system that's got a combination boiler in. So there's plenty of options there. It gives the consumer plenty of flexibility, and also it gives them it enables them to actually sort of start to sort of reduce the carbon footprint of their property without cost of actually maybe updating their fabric and updating their heating system, so they can take a more long-term approach. So this is really just showing how a hybrid system works. So potentially you've got the actual heat pump on the left-hand side. You've got you need about 2 kilowatts of electrical energy, and then you've got 3 kilowatts of energy come from outside air, depending on the outside air temperature. And I mean, this is quite a sort of just a rudimentary generalized slide. So it varies depending on the heat pump and the appliance and the system. So it's just very, very to show you the actual indication. And you've got a heat pump potentially it's at least 250% efficient. So that's a coefficient of performance 2.5. And you've got a boiler added to a boiler that's got 80%. So you can have the heat pump doing the majority of the heating, and then potentially you can have a combination boiler giving you instantaneous hot water, and also topping up the actual heating system on those extreme temperatures, especially if you remember things like beasts from the east. Okay, next slide, please. So this slide really is, I think, quite an important slide because it shows the contribution of a heat pump. And you can see if you look at the bottom left-hand graph, and this was information got through the Committee of Climate Change. You can see at the bottom left-hand side, there is a typical average winter day. You can see the heat pump is doing the majority of the work, 80% of the heat demand, but it will need to be topped up by another heat source. And if you've got an existing system, adding a heat pump to it, that can be by the boiler. And then the top left one is showing a worse winter day from a few years ago. And you can see how the heat pump is really, really struggling to actually keep up with the heat demand of the property, especially with older properties and below sort of like EPC band C and existing heating systems on. And then on the right-hand side, you can see the sort of looking over a typical year, and you can see obviously January and February and November and December, where the heat pump will struggle to cope. And we do know, I mean, in principle, in a relatively simple way, by introducing the heat pump to an existing system, you can actually really reduce your carbon footprint on your property, but also in principle, you can also reduce cost. because it's been proven through data analysis that we have also by third parties that averagely fuel costs can be reduced by 10 to 20%. Okay, so this is really the last bit of information I want to show you. Just showing some of the benefits of a hybrid mineral disruption. No, you don't have to convert your system to a low temperature system straight away. You can have a smaller heat pump situated outside your property, and there's no additional requirements for things like sort of buffer tanks. You can also absorb all the weather variations very easily. Sometimes with heat pumps, if it's not sized correctly, there can be an issue with comfort. But with a hybrid, you wouldn't see that because you've still got the boiler to support. And also, you need no electrical backup. And one of the big issues we had with heat pumps in the past is that when it's not suitable for that particular property, or the outside air temperature has been very low, you need a lot of electrical backup, which really pushes up the costs for the consumer on their energy bills. And it's been proven on many trials that the industry has done, but also third-party sort of verification that you can get 80% heat pump share of that contribution. So it's not just a tick the box exercise. You're really using the heat pump to provide as the main source of heat for your property. That's really an overview of the market and some of the actual heat pump sort of benefits. Over to you, Kat.
Thanks so much, Ewan. And he stuck time perfectly as well. So we're now going to move to the panel session of this webinar. So we are going to have Tony Brown from Inta, Stuart Callow from Worcester Bosch, and Mike Foster from UA. If they can all be on screen, and I will ask you all to introduce yourselves. And reminder that the chat function is available if anyone wants to put any questions in there. There'll also be Q&A at the end as well. There's also some questions from me. But if we start with just introduction of your role, organization, and if I could ask for what your main kind of view and pointers on why hybrids have been overlooked so far in the UK as a system, as a transitional technology for getting to net zero. I start with Stuart.
Good morning, everyone. Yes, I'm Stuart Callow from Worcester Bosch Group. I work in the Standards Department, the Government Regulation, Industry Bodies and Standards Department at Worcester Bosch. And I'm responsible for the New Technologies Group, which of course would include hybrids and heat pumps. And the main function of my role is to ensure that the business becomes prepared for changes in legislation and regulations. And that's a two-way communication route. It's preparing the business, but also working with trade associations, government departments, etc., to try and get the best outcome for the industry. So I have an interest in the topic. I've worked for Worcester Bosch for many years, and I've seen the transition through condensing boilers, and now as we begin to electrify. Point of view, I would think the reason why hybrids perhaps haven't got the focus that they have or that they deserve yet is probably there's a concern that they could be seen as a way to just leaving a boiler running 100% of the heating, and therefore not contributing to decarbonisation. But that is not the case. We saw the figures that Ewan presented. The heat pump really can take the greatest lion's share of the load, and with the intelligent controls that come as part of the hybrid, the hybrid can manage that itself.
Great, thanks, Stuart. If we go to Mike next.
Hi, my name's Mike Foster. I'm Chief Exec of the Trade Association EUA, and we have a technology agnostic view as to how we decarbonise homes. So we support all options, ranging from decarbonising the gas grid right the way through to all-electric heat pump only solutions. So we're happy to examine all options going forward. And what's attractive about the hybrid is that it is that third way. It's the middle ground where you can have the advantages of a gas boiler as your backup and as your combi hot water provider, but also your heat pump element can be producing your heat, particularly in those shoulder months that were highlighted in that presentation from Ewan. So we look at all of the options going forward. We think hybrid has a role to play. We don't think we should rule any technology out at this stage because the prize of decarbonising the home is too great to make a decision at this early stage. Why hybrids haven't really captured the attention to date? I think partly from what Stuart said, that there is a fear amongst some that this is just a Trojan horse to keep gas boilers in people's properties, and people will instinctively just carry on using gas as they do now. Like Stuart, we don't think that is necessarily true, particularly if, and some of the studies that have been mentioned abroad, particularly the Dutch study, show that a hybrid heat pump working to best effect actually reduces your energy bills even lower than a gas boiler would do on its own. And if people are driven not by the desire to achieve climate change, but the desire to minimise their heating bills, then a hybrid option should be on the table and should be of interest to them.
Great, thanks, Mike. Tony, do we have you back in the room?
Yeah, I'm from Inta. I have a special interest in hybrids. I feel that there's a lot of missed opportunities in the market at the moment. What I would like to do is try and, for our company anyway, to identify what these barriers are that are being thrown up. When I started work on designing a hybrid control, intelligent control unit, I was told at the very beginning that you will get a little bit of resistance to this. And that was the case at the time. But I think now that is starting to mellow. And from Ewan's and the Worcester Bosch presentation, you can see that there's a lot of missed opportunities there. So these are in sort of the region of education, and obviously the second one, grants and financial incentives, and then general public awareness. So that's where we're trying to go for the rest of this year, to try and resolve these issues and see if we can just bring this forward.
Okay, thanks everyone for introductions. I guess my first question to the panel, and I think you can meet yourselves for can open up to any of you. One of the things that we hear a lot is the number of heating engineers that we're going to need in the decarbonisation of our heating, and so the skills gap on the transfer of gas boiler installers that needed to be become heat pump installers. And so I'm wondering if anyone's got any views on, do hybrid systems make that transition easier or more appealing? So if you're still installing the gas boilers and maintaining the gas boilers as a transition for heat pumps as well.
I know I can answer that question because one of my roles until very recently was actually training installers.
Great.
The biggest barrier that we see in installing heat pumps isn't so much installing the heat pump itself. It's actually redesigning the actual heating system. So doing your heat loss calculations, your radiator sizing, your pump sizing, that is the biggest barrier for the whole industry. Whereas a hybrid, because you're using your existing heating system, it's basically an add-on, and it actually takes that, even though in principle that we should all be moving to low temperature systems, that is to us is the biggest barrier within the industry. And that's because also the sort of when you're designing your own heating system as well, there's a lot more mathematics and calculations, which, because we've been down the combi route all these years, it's the industry has lost that somewhat, and now the industry is trying to reintroduce all that that education to our customers. So it's not so much the heat pump itself; it's actually the actual system it goes on, which is probably the biggest barrier for installers.
I agree with that. For the installers, is understanding the correct applications for using an additional heat source, as in a hybrid system. So if we start with MCS, who've just changed their description of a hybrid, they make it's hybrid or supplementary, and there's a big difference there. But then there's, is it a system installation or a package solution? Is it bivalent, or is bivalent supplementary? And the installers tend to, as I see, sort of tar everything with one brush. I really enjoyed your presentation. You made that point where there are different sort of applications with a combi, supporting with a cylinder. And I don't think there's enough education in that sort of area. And it would make things a lot easier to understand if the installers were on board with this.
Just at a very practical level, to answer the question you posed about the number of installers in the industry, clearly, if you do not have to replace your hot water tank or put a new one in, if you don't have to change your radiators, the installation time for a hybrid is going to be less than a full heat pump only solution. By definition, that means that the requirement is going to be less for installers. So we can probably have an easier route to get the number of installers we need to decarbonise homes, just because it is a simpler process to do the hybrid than it is going down the full heat pump only solution.
Is that, just to push back a bit on that, is that not kind of delaying the I guess the hard stuff, in terms of, we know that a lot of heating systems aren't running as they should be. We know a lot of combi boilers aren't actually in condensing mode that they should be, and the system design that does take the skills and time of setting up, like for a heat pump system and like lower running temperatures. That is what we should be doing for gas boilers as well. And so if we're kind of avoiding that by saying, oh, we can just add on a heat pump to it, is that, and saying that that's kind of the easy way now, is that not kind of delaying it all?
No, I don't think it is delaying, because where we believe is the route forward is with low temperature heating systems. Yes, we want condensing boilers to operate as efficiently as possible, because that's got to be in the interest of the consumer, and we should be looking through the eyes of the consumer in all of this. But the point I'm making, that if you have a hybrid working with a combi, you don't have to put a hot water cylinder in. So all the time that is taken to pipe and fit a hot water cylinder, that is saved, for there are fewer installer hours required on the installation. And if that is grossed up with the sheer number, the 20-odd million homes that have got to go through this process, then that will accrue to fewer installers required. And getting the number of installers that we need is going to be difficult. If we went down the heat pump only option, it will require far more trained, skilled installers than it would do a hybrid system. That's the point that's being made. Not to say that we shouldn't operate systems as efficiently as we should. We always should, because that's what's in the consumer interest. And a hybrid option gives you that flexibility to have a cheaper running cost for the consumer, a cheaper system to install for the consumer, and we don't have the constraint of not having enough installers. I think that was the point of the question that you first posed.
Yeah, thanks for that. On the cost thing, you're saying it's cheaper to install a hybrid system than just a heat pump system. Is that because you're not doing the redesign of the piping and hot water tank? Because on the one hand, you then have two systems to maintain, and the capital cost there. I mean,
look, Ewan is going to be far more expert on this than I am, but my understanding is, from what you said, from what Ewan said, that you will have, first of all, a smaller heat pump required as part of an option, a hybrid option. So that's going to be cheaper, marginally, not massively, but marginally cheaper. And yes, if you do not have to go through the resizing of radiators, all the pipe work associated with that, the replacement of radiators, the installation of a new hot water cylinder in the vast majority of homes that have got a combi boiler, by definition, that has got to be cheaper than the hybrid option, which is putting a small unit in to run alongside a boiler with the controls. It's got to be a cheaper option.
If I can add to that, yeah, I mean, if you're going to, when we're training our customers, we're actually on heat pumps, we're saying the first approach you should look at, really, albeit we want to sell as many heat pumps as we like, is look at the fabric first approach. So is your house got the correct installation on, then you look at your heating system to actually determine whether or not that's so it's not just about installing the heat pump itself. It's also actually making sure your property is actually up to the actual installation requirements, especially with the if you're converting an EPC band E and trying to get it up to a C. And sometimes it can be done quite easily, but sometimes it's a bit more expensive. So it's more than just the actual cost of the actual individual components, albeit if you're just putting the outdoor units on a hybrid system onto an existing combi boiler or a boiler system, it's obviously cheaper than putting in a heat pump plus an indoor unit plus a cylinder plus also the actual additional controls. So yeah, so it's bigger than just the products, is what I'm trying to say.
Just one other point is also with a hybrid installation, it enables this transition, but it's a lot less disruption in the home. There's a lot less changes to be made, a lot less pipe work and that sort of to be taken out before you start. And again, it varies from installation to installation. But I hope I'm sort of backing up what Mike said because I couldn't hear it. But yeah, I mean, there is considerable cost savings to be made to enable that transition into a heat pump by adding it on. And it's just a first stage.
It delivers flexibility, doesn't it? And it doesn't force the consumer down down one road. It doesn't force them into perhaps the greatest amount of expenditure that they may face, which would be the full system conversion to a full heat pump, which is a lot of capital outlay, even with the boiler upgrade scheme grant. So it's a little bit more piecemeal, and perhaps then they can do things in time, but delivering a more flexible approach for the consumer. And completely support Mike's point that we should be thinking about this as how do we support consumers, owner occupiers to make this transition.
There's also a word used in Europe that on a hybrid system, it's a fail-safe system. So if you are a homeowner or a user, you have two heat sources. And if one does fail, you've got that confidence that you've got two heat sources. So there's more advantages to be gained from these hybrid systems.
Yeah, we are we are unusual compared to the rest of Europe, that we have a lot of houses with one heating system, whereas a lot of Europe has multiple different options. It's like an air-to-air heat pump, but then maybe an oil burner, and the cost thing as well. Yeah, I think that is really important on the running cost, that you can have it set up to be running on a cost optimal scenario when needed versus the gas versus the electric. So currently you can't get a hybrid install under the boiler upgrade scheme. So why do you think that hasn't happened yet? And do you think there should be grants for this?
I think there should be grants, particularly when you can see that that a heat pump can contribute up to 80% of the heat in that property. And as Ewan pointed out, that's off third-party accredited testing. That's not just a number that we've plucked out of the air. They are a very realistic stepping stone in decarbonisation. I think they're not in the scheme at the moment for the reason I mentioned in my introduction, that I think there's a concern that it's a way of leaving the boiler in place and not changing the habits of a user. But they are flexible, they are intelligent, so a user could, if they wish, they could be led by CO2 impact, or they can be led by pricing, whichever they favour, and the intelligent heat pump hybrid controller will manage that for them. Of course, if only we could address the spark gap issue with electricity being over 4 times the cost of gas. You start to tie those two together, that you could have running cost savings and CO2 optimization. But yeah, I think it's the fear that boilers will be left in place, but there's the controls allow that to not happen. And then with good messaging, which maybe we'll come on to later, we've got to take the British public with us in making a request for a hybrid. Installers and manufacturers deliver what customers ask for. So we've got to take them with us. They need to, understand that, this is a stepping stone, much like it was in the car industry.
There's also another point that could be taken into consideration, which is not from the homeowner's point of view, but it's from the supply, from the grid. if we did step up this installation and meet these government targets, is the grid going to be able to cope with all of this additional demand on it? Whereas if you treat this market where it's existing housing stock and you've got hybrids within there, then you can sort of balance this off against an over demand. It's just another way of looking at it too, and an important point, I think.
I would say, look, I think that the grid issue, I think, is maybe a separate question that we might want to come to, because Tony's right to raise that. Going back to the question about should they be subsidised under the boiler upgrade scheme? Absolutely. And the reason I say that is at the moment, government policy is entirely inconsistent. You can get a hybrid grant under ECO. You can fit a hybrid under what was the home upgrade scheme. You got half a credit for fitting a hybrid under the government's clean heat market mechanism, but there was no support whatsoever under the boiler upgrade scheme. And just for pure consistency, I would argue that should lend itself to having subsidies available under the boiler upgrade scheme, but clearly not at the full value of 7,500, because the cost of, as we've just discussed, the cost of fitting a hybrid is considerably cheaper than fitting a full heat pump only solution. So even if you were to halve the grant, let's say to 3,750, you would potentially get 2 lots, 2 homes decarbonised to the tune of 80%, rather than 1 home at potentially 100%. And so you are getting more homes decarbonised. You're saving more carbon through a hybrid option if that grant is available and taken up. And so, it does beg the question in my eyes, is government policy really about just decarbonising people's homes, just saving carbon, or actually is the policy about directing people to an all-electric only option? Because the two policies don't necessarily mean the same thing. And if carbon is the enemy, if climate change is what we're addressing, then actually we should be looking at a subsidy for a hybrid option and not sacrificing all options on the altar of let's electrify everything.
I can see where that came from, but an applause emoji just came off my screen. So someone agrees with you. Thanks for that. Yeah, I think there's some good points there made about I think we agree on a more outcome-focused and technology-agnostic approach, which is easy to say but hard to do in policy. But yeah, no, I think the consumer, as Phoebe has said, the consumer needs to be at the heart of this and to bring the public along, which goes back to what Tony was saying earlier about the public awareness of hybrid heating systems. And so heat pumps, they're not a new technology, but they are a new kind of concept to a lot of the public. It's not a technology that we have a lot of in homes in the UK. So I was wondering people's thoughts on how we go about this communication to the public and to kind of allay any miscommunication or the complexity around having these two systems, and if that's an easier transition, more appealing for the consumers, or is it a confusing approach?
I'm happy to put a few words into the debate on this. I think if we're looking at it through the eyes of the consumer, which I think is always a good starting point on this, the main driver for them, I think, will be about keeping bills down. And I was genuinely surprised by the studies that came from the Netherlands on a hybrid, which suggested that, in order of expense, the heat pump only option was more expensive than a gas boiler. I expected that. That's common, and that's truism. That's a statement of fact. What I didn't expect was that the hybrid would then be cheaper than the gas boiler only option. But then when you go through the process of how that comes about, the heat pump doing the shoulder months, the gas boiler kicking in in those really cold days when the performance of a heat pump isn't great, and when the spark gap of over 4, as Stuart mentioned, starts to play against you, then taking all of those factors into account, the fact that a hybrid is cheaper, it's 50 quid cheaper than a gas boiler only option in terms of running cost. But actually, that's the approach that I think you have to make to the consumer. To start with, it's a cheaper option. If you then build into it, it's less disruptive. You don't have to rip this out. You don't have to find space for a hot water cylinder. That's, again, an attraction. And people genuinely, I think, are attracted to the concept of a combi boiler providing hot water. It's an area that people don't often talk about, but that behavioural aspect of having a tank that might not be big enough, having a tank that's emptied by your teenage children, actually a combi avoids all of that. So those behavioural aspects can also play in favour of a combi option and shouldn't be ignored.
Thanks, Mike. Tony, do we have you back in the room?
Yeah, I'm back now.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I don't know if you heard the question before you got dropped off about the communications with the public and both with consumers. Because you mentioned that at the start, in terms of if there's any things you think are important on how we go about raising awareness of hybrid heat pumps with the public, and if there's any around the consumer messaging that we should focus on.
It all comes back, in my opinion, to these grants which get all the media exposure. I don't necessarily agree that it's a good way forward all the time, keep putting money in it. But a colleague of mine was telling me the other day that in Italy they get tax rebates for installing hybrid systems. It's far more accepted in Europe, and maybe we're a little bit behind, but I think we need some media support, and to generate that media support, then unfortunately it has to come from some sort of monetary incentive. And like Mike was making the point, I mean, it can be a much cheaper installation, and that always sort of makes people look up. I think a lot of households are used to having 2 heat sources. I know from where I live, in the street that I live in, there's a WhatsApp group from all of the houses there, and they all at this time of year are ordering in logs, and they're ordering in chimney sweeps and that, because they're used to having 2 heat sources, and they're using this carbon burning logs as their second heat source, and they're quite happy with that. So if we can get some media support,
I think also, just to add to that, from a consumer point of view, I think a lot of consumers, they're really, in the immediate, they're really concerned about cost. And as we know, fuel price, sort of cost of fuel has gone up over the last few years, and the government's promised to reduce it by 2030 by £300 for each household. A hybrid, okay, you've got the initial investment, but annual running costs are lower. It's been proven by testing. But also it gives consumers, I mean, a lot of my friends, I mean, they actually are asking me, can I install a heat pump in their house? And I'm saying, and you look at the house, you think, be careful there, because you could end up paying actually more for your energy costs than you are currently now. But if you give them an opportunity of actually, do you know what, I can actually add something to my additional system, then over the next 10 years, I'm actually contributing then to 80% of actually sort of, with a heat pump taking 80% of that demand, they're actually from an ethical point of view feel a lot more comfortable, because they're actually helping support decarbonisation. And I think there's that narrative to go down as well. Sort of you can get, it's not just cost or looking after the planet. You can actually, in principle, it's a good bridging technology to do both. And then maybe 10 or 15 years time, or when it's due to, then could possibly convert to a full heat pump system.
Yeah, I was just going to add there to Ewan's point that by then the consumer has then got the experience of the heat pump, and maybe some of the fears that the consumers have today about hearing the scare stories about not being warm enough or high running costs. They'll have had 10, 15, maybe even more years of experience of the heat pump contributing into the hybrid, and perhaps then feel more confident in making that step change to a full heat pump system.
And can I just bring up the point of SAP? which is being replaced with the home energy plan. Now, we're going to have to change direction on this. We've spent the last 18 months talking to BRE about SAP and how our proposals were for our product, which I won't go into, fits into that. And there just isn't a category for it. They just don't recognise it. But now SAP, because they was going to put us into category Q, which is for innovation. It didn't really fit, but that's as far as we got, and we couldn't get any further with it. Now we've got the home energy plan. I'd be interested to see how that sort of blends in with a hybrid system, because you've got the two energy sources. From our sort of opinion is the heat pump should supply 100% of the heating demand at the design value. So anything outside of that, then you can come up with some sort of calculation to see how your running costs are. But if you're coming down to 80%, then I think, well, I don't know is the thing. How are these people going to sort of view hybrid systems?
Just an important point that is linked to Leda's question in the chat, and it's something that we've thought about quite a lot, is that if the hybrid heat pump, if the heat pump is installed that isn't large enough to fully heat the house independently, then you couldn't just remove the gas boiler and have the heat pump operating as the sole heat source. You would need to also replace the heat pump and upgrade the system at a later cost. So Leda's question is around how do we ensure that hybrid heat pumps serve as a true bridging technology on the pathway to full decarbonisation, rather than kind of locking in to continue reliance on gas, and how easily like a hybrid system put in today could be swapped to a standalone heat pump later. And if anyone's got any experiences on that.
Well, if I can actually challenge the premise of the question a bit there, Kat, because the assumption that people are making is that we're still going to be using just natural gas. Well, actually, if you look to decarbonise the gas network, then you don't have to see the hybrid as a bridging route to a heat pump only option. You could actually use the hybrid as a route to immediately give you 80% decarbonisation. And then the remaining element, the bit where the gas boiler currently is consuming natural gas, could be consuming biomethane, it could be consuming hydrogen. And in rural areas, we could be talking bio-LPG and biofuels. So we could actually be looking at the sort of top-up fuel, if you like, being from a decarbonised source. And if the prize is to decarbonise your home, then we have won the race. If your prize is to make it go all electric only, then actually, come back to that point I made earlier, is that really what the game is about? Or is it genuinely about decarbonising the home, in which case a hybrid working with a decarbonised gas network or a decarbonised LPG or oil system gives you not just 80% saving, but a 100% carbon saving. Job done.
That's a fair point that we should be keeping in mind, that hybrid heating systems don't just mean heat pump and gas boiler. It is heat pump and another source. It does raise many difficult questions for government on the future of the gas grid and how you manage that. If it's, if there are areas that's really switching off it, you then have the maintenance cost of the gas grid falling on fewer households, which would need to be very carefully managed. And there is another question that I wanted to ask about what you are hearing from installers as trade bodies and manufacturers. So do any of you have insights from installers on kind of their feedback on how they're experiencing hybrid heating systems at the moment? On is it worth it? Is there time, like the financial and onboarding of their time? And sort of thing we can learn from that.
Maybe if I just start off, one of the things we do here is as the installers are looking to take a consumer in a full heat pump journey, we hear about the drop-off effect, so you get a consumer interested, and then perhaps once they understand the overall cost, and the disruption, they drop off, or they drop off when when they understand that for some reason they can't get the funding, for example. And so if you think then about that, that's time that the installer's invested only to then, to not win a job. So that's one of the things that I've heard. And you think, well, if the heat pump is joining the backup source, the boiler, in a hybrid configuration, you would think that is an easier installation, but also an easier design. So maybe that's one of the positives to take from a move towards hybrids for installers.
Do we approach public awareness before the installers? That might be a message that we could get out there, and then the installer follows along those lines. I don't get to sort of speak to a lot of installers. Generally, when it comes back to me, it's something weird and wonderful, like coupling up with a log burner or something like this, rather than the easiest way forward is with a combi boiler, just added. You add the heat pump and then have a control system. It's the control system in between.
Just really want to back up what Tony and Stuart have said. I mean, we do obviously speak to a lot of customers, and we present to them about the future of heating, and they like the idea about a hybrid. They think that's a sort of a more palatable approach purely from their skill set. They see the benefits of it, but I think one of the big things is that trying to persuade the consumer, especially, for example, because a lot of gas boilers and oil boilers are generally replaced in the retrofit market when there's distressed purchase. And the last thing they're thinking about, should I actually put a heat pump in? Because it's probably going to it becomes a pure heat pump system is like a long-term project, whereas a lot of the market is distressed purchase. My boiler's starting to fall into disrepair, I need to replace it, or it breaks down. So they like the idea, and I think there's got to be a change. There's almost got to be a shift in our heating systems, not just regarding it as this little thing that we never see, but also as a real commodity, like another appliance within a property, and actually how it can benefit our property. And I think that's a whole communication topic, really. But also, I think it's also that they're not convinced. Sometimes they're convinced by the technology, but because the general perception is that it's the all electric route or nothing. I think there's a lot of what's the word? Trying to think of the right word now. Sort of just caution, let's say, and also lack of funding, like you do on a pure heat system, is also a sort of a blocker for them as well.
Thanks Ian for that. I'm going to squeeze in a last question from Clive in the chat on the issue of, so if you have two heating systems as a hybrid, what happens when one of them breaks before the other? So if you have a gas boiler paired for a heat pump, what happens if the boiler reaches end of life before the heat pump? Do you have to get another gas boiler, or can you go to the heat pump only route at that stage if it's more of a kind of a pathway and a roadmap for the house rather than the distress purchase, which can be challenging for heat pumps?
We're making the assumption that the current government policies stay in place up to 2050, and that's not a given. If we have a general election in 3-4 years' time, whenever, and a new government comes in with a different view towards net zero, then actually the whole debate might become, actually, that's a has-been, and people carry on using gas boilers only because a new government might have changed their mind completely about net zero. So we had to be mindful of that. And that's why any forced option that Tony alluded to, any rush to, let's say, an all-electrification route, it might be in haste, and consumers might come to regret it if they've gone through massive expenditure, £13,000 say, to put a heat pump in, higher bills because they haven't changed to a smart tariff to give them a lower bill, and their neighbour stays on their gas boiler, government policy changes in 4 or 5 years' time. You wouldn't be a very happy bunny if you'd gone through that process.
Thanks, Mike. I think that, I think we're out of time, Tony. So I think that's a good point to end on, though, in terms of we need to be making the alternatives to the current heating systems more attractive for consumers in all ways, not just because they'll decarbonize. They need to be the better option for consumers to choose. So even when the government does change policies, it's the consumer's choice wins over that. So thank you very much all for your time and your contributions. If you have any more questions, then you can get in touch with Hannah Clark, who sent out the invites, and she'll put you in touch with the relevant team. There will be a press release, I believe, by Inta and Reeves on the hybrid heating discussion, and also sharing the results of the survey that was done ahead of the webinar.